Hi, this is Ken Watkins. I'm sitting in a delightful new car with Arnold and Marilee and Sean, and we're going to just record my whole life history. The earliest I can remember was when John was about 2.5 and I was at 4, and we were sent outside to give Mom a little piece in North Carolina, and so naturally we found the mud in the yard and we're making mud balls, and we threw them around, but one happened to hit the new white siding on the house, and it stuck, and it looked like a sore, and I said, "Look at that sore," and John said, "Oh, that does look like a sore," and he and I then said, "Let's make some more sores on the house." And so we had about 20 or 30 sores on the house when Mother came out, and she saw the mud on the house, and she wasn't very happy with John and I, especially with me. The next earliest, or perhaps even earlier, was Mom said that my first 2 words that I spoke were "mom o me," more oatmeal, more oatmeal. And she said I sure liked oatmeal, and she even gave me a little toy pot where I could cook my own oatmeal all day long. I had an older brother, Harold, and in Minnesota we moved up there, and the twins were born in 1929. And anyway, when Harold was about 11 or 12, we noticed that they had a special in St. Paul that you could get on the streetcars free and go downtown free. So the 3 boys of us got on and went down and window shopped, and when we were tired and hungry, we got back on the streetcar, only to find that the free offer was only going downtown, not going back. And so we got pushed off by the conductor, and we started walking the 11 miles back to our house. And after about 6 miles, we were so hungry, and Harold had a dime in his pocket, so he bought a loaf of bread at a bakery, and oh, he doled it out piece by piece, and I've never had such good bread, nor had a loaf last so many steps. But our folks again were quite unhappy with us. They said, "Why didn't you spend the dime on a telephone call, and we would have come down, picked you up, and not had us worry all Saturday?" So that's, boys will be boys. During these tough days, we didn't have too much in the way of luxury, but one time Mother came to me and said, "Here are 2 Hershey bars. You divide with your brother," because John wasn't around right then. So I looked for John, didn't see him, and I saw that Hershey bar just waiting to be eaten, and so I opened my Hershey bar and ate it, and still didn't see John for a while. And finally I saw him, and I came up to him, and without saying much, I just broke the other bar into uneven pieces. One was slightly bigger than the other. And I said, "John, can I have this smaller piece?" And he said, "Oh, sure." And so he was so happy to have more than a half a Hershey bar, and I was happy too. But many years later, we still laugh at it, how I foxed him and made everything come out fine for both of us, especially me. John and I, when we were in junior high, had large paper routes for the Minneapolis Star, and in 1936, I think it was, the King and Queen of England were going to come for the first time and visit their domain of Canada. And the Minneapolis Star told the boys that if they get new customers, a certain number, they could go by train up to Vancouver, to Winnipeg, Canada, and see the King and Queen of England. So they had about 500 boys on this train that left St. Paul, and it was almost like an army troop train, but we found seats, and the seats kind of folded down so you can make makeshift beds, and so we didn't do too bad, although with so many kids you can imagine there wasn't much sleeping. But when we got there, we were taken to a nice hotel where we really did have a good night's sleep, and where we had a great breakfast. I remember the great breakfast. And then they took us for a walk to see the King and Queen. They promised us a grandstand viewing. And when we got to where the King and Queen would come along, and I had a new camera, why, there was no seats there. All we could do, the 500 boys, is stand. So that was a grandstand. But anyway, along came the King and Queen in the back seat of an open car with a chauffeur in the up front, and I got my camera ready, and when the car was closed I snapped it, and I managed to snap off 2 pictures, and I eagerly looked at the pictures when we got them developed, and there was in the first picture a picture of the chauffeur and the front end of the vehicle, and the second picture only showed the license plate of the so I was so busy taking pictures I didn't even see the King and Queen hardly, but that was in a way a fun memory.
How many hours were you on the train?
So we were on the train approximately 25 hours, and
is that one way?
Yeah, each way. And
tell about the trip that when y'all were going back up to Minnesota when you moved, and the car.
Harold always loved cars, and he would bicycle along the alleys. They had alleys in Minneapolis, and if he spotted a car that looked like it was just set back there, not used, he would knock and ask them how much it was. And he bought a number of cars. I know bought one for $5, and on one, 1929, he paid $20 for. But anyway, on one of the Buicks that he bought for $5, he had it fixed up and bought a new license for it, and he was pretty good. Dad said we'll have to move up to Carlton because, frankly, I can't pay the $35 a month rent, and the farm is already there with a house on it, and so we loaded up a trailer, a 4-wheel trailer, hooked it behind John's car, and Dad was going to come up later with Mother and the twins in Maryland. And so we got started, and I remember the trailer was so heavy that the Buick, even though he put it in low gear, it was slowing down, and he said, "John, Ken, jump out and push." And so we jumped out and pushed, and we did get over that hill in St. Paul, and we're poking along at a pretty good speed of 25 miles an hour, and up north of Pine City, the car stopped, and Harold checked it, the crank, he put the crank in and cranked, and he said, "Oh, I think the timing gear is gone." And sure enough, we had to stay there, and along came Dad finally, and he hooked onto the 4-wheel trailer, and we all crowded into the 1923 Buick. And the next day, Harold found a used timing gear and hitchhiked back, and bless his heart, on the highway he took part of the engine apart, put on the used timing gear and repaired it right on the side of the road and drove back up. So he was quite a guy with cars. In a way, though we missed the big junior high and high school that Minneapolis had, we enjoyed the Carleton High School and the farm an awfully lot. And I first met Shirley, or saw her rather, singing in the choir of the Presbyterian Church there in Carleton. And
what grade were you in?
And I was in 11th grade, and she was dating someone else. But to be accurate, I'd seen Shirley for an hour at a time at church, even when we were in junior high school. We'd come up for a few weeks in the summer. But I never did date her in high school because she was dating someone else, and I was too shy anyway. So, but when I was a senior in college, I came home for Christmas, and after church, I overheard Shirley telling a friend of hers that she was going to take the bus to Duluth for shopping. And Mother had already asked me to drive her to Duluth for shopping, so I did have enough encouragement to say, you can ride with us if you want. And she said, that would be great. And so we went to Duluth, did shopping, and I don't remember what we did for lunch, but I do remember after supper, Mother always liked to end the shopping expedition with a movie. So we went to a movie, and I sat next to Shirley, and I held her hand. And I do remember also that Sally and Hallie were sitting next to Shirley, and I was on the other side of Shirley. And first one would look at us holding hands, and then would back up, and then the other twin would look over and see what was more interesting than the movie. And so it was pretty wonderful holding her hand and sitting that close next to her.
What movie was it?
What?
What movie?
The movie is long since gone from my memory, but not the memory of holding her little hand. Anyway, that could have been the end of it, except that she had on Christmas had a class, and she gave out candy boxes with a little string on the handle of the box of hard candy to each of their students in Sunday school. And she said, there's one left over, would you like it, Ken? And I'd been eating too much, and too much candy, too much food. I said, oh, I couldn't begin to eat it. Now, I could in a month, and I dismissed it. But lo and behold, at the University of Minnesota, here came a little package, and when I opened it up, there was a box of candy that she had offered me a month earlier. And so I wrote back to her, and when I did get back for spring break and so on, we did date, and our dating went awfully fast. I remember March 14th was the first time I kissed her, and April 25th was the first time that we were alone enough for me to ask her to marry me, and she said she would. But then I had to go into the Navy and had a 9-day leave, and I said, Shirley, on the phone, I said, I've got a 9-day leave, let's get married. And she said, let me talk to my folks. And later on she reported that when she said that I'd asked her to marry me on my Navy leave, her daddy put down his fork and said, but Shirley, you're just a little girl. And she said that she got up crying and went to her bedroom. kind of showing, proving that she was a little girl still. But the folks relented enough to let us, at the rather inconvenient time of December 23rd, 1944, to let us get married then. And that was pretty wonderful. She's been a wonderful wife. Marilee remembers one story, and I'll tell it, of we were to graduate from the naval training, which was similar to boot camp for the regular sailors, but this was officer training for the officers in Tucson, Arizona. And I tried to let me out of the appearing for the graduating ceremony so I could catch the train, but they wouldn't. And so I got four others rather, and myself. We each paid $30, which was a lot of money, and we got a private plane that would hold the 5 of us to fly us to El Paso, and we could fly there quick enough and catch that train before it left El Paso and get to Carlton on Friday night instead of Saturday night of the day of the wedding. So we rushed, and that was pretty much fun. First time I've been in the airplane, and we got to the airport, and the train was just about ready to pull out, and we rushed out with our gear on our back, and I remember I got there about the last, and got on the back lowest step of the caboose, or of the end car, passenger train car, and the train started to move, and they squeezed up a little bit tighter, and I got up on the second step, and then the third step, finally on the platform of the outside platform of the train, and it felt pretty good to be on the train. And during the next 20 hours, they kept squishing in, and we finally got inside the train. But that night, every seat was taken, and I did find one seat that wasn't taken. It was kind of a troop train, but there was no one sitting on the toilet of the women's bathroom. So I sat there. But once in a while during the night, I'd feel a tap on my shoulder, and I'd have to get up and get out for 5 minutes. But anyway, got home Friday night so I could go to the practice for the wedding. And everybody heaved a sigh of relief when I was safely home.
Would you have missed your practice?
Yeah, I would have missed the practice, and actually would have maybe missed the wedding, or the wedding would have to be delayed the next day.
What time did you plan? And you did the train. Was it supposed to come in on the original train? And what time was your wedding?
So the wedding was Saturday night at 8, and the train, if I caught the one that we were hoping, would be coming at 6 o'clock, I think, in Duluth. No, we could get off at Carlton. At about 6 o'clock on Friday. So, let me turn this off. Mother and Dad were, after they were married, they lived on the farm for a few years.
John, look at the big helicopter.
And oh yeah. And they enjoyed it, but the Presbyterian Church needed a man to be in charge of an orphanage, a boys' orphanage of 50 boys near Asheville, North Carolina. And so Dad felt that he could fulfill the 3 requirements of running the orphanage and teaching the boys to farm and of raising their food. And so he was down in North Carolina for about 8 years, and John and I were born in North Carolina. We probably would have stayed there, except Mother found out that she was pregnant with twins, and she, for some reason, thought that she would die, and she knew that her 2 brothers were doctors in Minnesota, and so she urged Dad to move back to Minnesota, which they did. The twins were born on December 30th, 1929, and Marilyn in June 4th, 1933. So they had 6 kids then, and Dad worked, when he moved to Minneapolis, to St. Paul rather, he worked at the university campus of Minnesota. And we lived in Minneapolis from about from about 1934 to about 1938, 39. And during that time, Dad had changed jobs and was selling milking machines, which were hard to sell back in the Depression. So we moved to the farm because he had the farm and the house was available, and that's where, of course, I met Shirley. When we go back, first just for the summer, for a month or so at the time, but then in 1939 we went back permanently, and I finished the junior and the senior years in Carleton, and then started at the University of Minnesota. Let's see. It was quite interesting in a way. After Mother and Dad decided to move back to Minnesota, they had to load up the Model T Ford with what they could put in it. And I remember the running boards were just loaded up to the door, middle of the doors, and we 3 boys were squeezed in the back seat, and Mother and Dad squeezed in the front with all the other stuff. And we'd be buzzing along at 25 miles an hour, and when we came to a steep hill, Dad would have to go all the way from high to low, because that's all the Model T Ford had, low and high. And we'd slowly go up the mountain or the hill, and even slower, because when we got behind a truck, they were usually a Ford truck with just 2 speeds also, and so they would go up very slowly up hills. But when we got to Chicago, Dad had a brother-in-law, Leslie Tostovan, there, and he was pretty good with cars. And he said, "Harlow, why don't you trade your 1925 Model T Ford off, because I know of a 1923 Buick that was owned by a doctor, and it's in good shape, and you only have to give your newer Ford for the older Buick plus $150. So Dad looked at it, and Dad fell in love, and especially we boys fell in love with the fact that it had 2 doors that you could lock. It had windows that you could crank up and down. It had a gear shift. It could go 60 miles an hour instead of 30. And it still had just 2 wheel brakes. the rear brakes were the only brakes it had. But Dad paid him the $150 plus the old, the newer rather, Model T Ford. And so we rode in great style from Chicago up to Minnesota in a Buick with nice trunk and comfortable, quiet. It didn't have a heater except the heater that Dad didn't want to use because it ran the exhaust gas from the muffler into an inside heat exchanger, but Dad was afraid that it leaked carbon monoxide, so he wouldn't use that heater. But otherwise, we were in good shape. One of the things that we three boys enjoyed, we didn't have a TV, of course, and Mother and Dad were good readers, and Mother would read stories like Little Women and then the sequel Little Men to us. And when she was tied up, why Dad was a good reader, and he'd continue that tradition. And he was kind of anxious for us to learn different psalms, and so we learned the 23rd Psalm and different ones. And I remember how discouraged he was, though, one time when the company came over and he wanted John and I to say the 23rd Psalm, and we were in just a bad, forgetful mood that night, and Dad had to prompt us about 5 times to get through the 23rd Psalm. I always enjoyed electrical stuff, and one time made a little arc welder out of some flashlight battery carbons and using electric iron to kind of limit the current. So if I shorted the welding together, why, it would just heat the iron. Anyway, I enjoyed welding and burning things for an hour, and without any welding glasses, dark glasses, and I would have continued on, except John came in and said, "Ken, let's go out and play baseball." So I reluctantly disconnected the welder and went out, and I remember things looked kind of strangely, kind of on the orange side, as though the sun were setting, and and later on my eyes began to burn, and Mother worriedly called and got some prescription eye medicine, and I think I did miss a day of school the next day, and Mother would tell me a verse and have me memorize it, then another verse, and so I learned some Bible verses from Mother while I couldn't read.
Which scripture?
And what?
Do you remember which psalm?
Later on, for English, we had to learn quite a few lines of poetry, and the English teacher said if we wanted to, we could read the poetry of the Bible, the Psalms, and so Mother had me learn the 37th Psalm. "Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity," and so on. And that's a lovely psalm. My dad, when he was at the orphanage, directing the boys and raising the food, he would sometimes take me out with him when he was plowing or disking, and he had a tractor, a Fordson tractor, and I'd stand on the fender. It had a little place you could stand on, and it was so much fun to ride the tractor with him as he would plow and plow, or especially as he would run the wide disc and smooth off the ground with a disc. But I got careless and wasn't hanging on very tightly, and it went over a big buried stump or something, and the sudden rise of the tractor wheel tossed me off the tractor, and I remember vaguely the disc behind riding over my leg, but the ground was so soft and that it didn't hurt my leg much. But Dad jumped off the tractor and lifted up the disc as best he could and let me slide out, and then he carried me all the way to the house, and I remember feeling so safe and so secure and so content, just relaxing in Dad's arms. I must have been about 4.5 or 5, and I know how worried he was, but I wasn't worried. It was kind of fun hearing Dad, whenever I was farming around him, when he was farming rather, to hear him explain how wonderful God was to make the seeds and the animals and the rain and the soil, and it was just about like going and hearing a good sermon all the time. When I came back from the Navy, I wasn't sure what to do, and Dad suggested that I go the 7 miles over to Cloquet and see if they want an electrical engineer. And so in my blue uniform, I went over, and I think my uniform helped me get the job, because I walked in and the office, kind of all the people looked at me, and they gave me kind of special treatment, and they said they would hire me, and I was too naive to ask how much I'd get. And so I worked for a whole month before I found out that I would get $225, and that was a good salary. The Navy had been paying me $150, and a chemical engineer was sitting next to me, and he wormed out of me, against my better judgment, how much I was making, and he said he was making 200, and he said, "How much are you making?" when he saw me open my first paycheck. And I squirmed, and I had to say 225. He never forgave me for that. So I can see why the companies don't want you to mention what you make. But Shirley was a good helper, and we worked on that first house in Cloquet. Whenever I got home, we'd normally be working on the inside of that house. And it was a well-built house. We built it thinking we'd live there probably permanently. But then Kimberly Clark invited us to come down to Neenah for an interview, and it was kind of funny. I didn't want to go to work for the Kimberly Clark in their engineering, because they had 100 engineers in one great big room, all at drafting tables, and I thought, that's not for me. And so I told them I liked a small company better, and I went back to Cloquet. And a couple months later, they wrote again and said they had a small company that would like an electrical engineer in Alabama. Would I consider it? And so I went down. You're right.
A lot tougher trip back then.
You're right, Arnold. When we were going to leave for Alabama, Shirley said that was the second time in her life that she'd seen her father cry, because he thought that he would never see us again when we left for way off in Alabama. But because he hadn't traveled much except to Europe with the Army in World War I. But things got better, and he bought a new car, and he actually came down to visit us a couple times. And
y'all went home every year, didn't you?
and then we usually got home once a year. So that worked out good. Ken Jr. kind of wanted right from the start to go along with the steps I took and work. And so he said one time, "Dad, I'm thinking of going to Georgia Tech, take engineering. What engineering field should I take, electrical?" And I said, "Well, you could if you really enjoy electrical work. Otherwise, mechanical engineering gives you a little bit broader field of work and of application. Electrical kind of specializes it." So he thought about that, and he decided to take mechanical. And two of his friends also became engineers, and Shirley Ann married one of his friends, and Marilee married another of his friends. And Ken said to Ginny, "You have to go out and find a husband of your own."
What is that one?
This tape was made by Dad on the week of his birthday, his 78th birthday, June 2001, while we were coming back from visiting Aunt Marilyn and Uncle Ralph in New Mexico. Arnold had a school in New Mexico, and in 1 week we drove all the way out to New Mexico, spent 2.5 days with them, and came back. Dad drove a day here the day before and drove back the next day.